As Britain hangs up the bunting for King Charles's coronation, 4,000 miles away in the Commonwealth nation of Grenada, arrangements look a little different.
There is very little or no interest in the coronation of King Charles. It is the business of the British.
For many on the 7 Caribbean islands, which are still within the Commonwealth realm, having the British monarch as their head of state is a pertinent reminder of a tumultuous past.
From the darkest days of our past and the appalling atrocity of slavery,
the realm was born from the British Empire and funded by the proceeds of slavery, making the relationship with modern Britain deeply complicated. Now, with the death of Queen Elizabeth II, a new era is being ushered in, and with it, restlessness is growing in the former British colonies yet to become republics.
It is the final piece of the puzzle when it comes to our sovereignty as an independent nation.
Welcome to the podcast. In this week's episode, we'll be looking at whether King Charles could be the last Commonwealth monarch. I'm joined by Alannah Francis, who's been exploring how more Caribbean islands may now ditch their colonial past and get rid of the British monarch. Alannah, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, let's go back to the start on this. How did these countries, which are hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from the UK, end up with a British monarch as the head of state?
So there are 14 Commonwealth realms, and they were each colonised by the British, and so part of the British Empire. And when that ended, they retained the British monarch as their head of state.
So Alannah, day to day, what does it kind of mean to be a part of the Commonwealth?
So for countries that are Commonwealth realms, so there are 14 of them, many of them in the Caribbean, they do benefit from having that connection to the British monarchy. So there are some financial benefits. They also use the British judicial system, so the Privy Council, as their final appeal court. But that's actually been an area of contention. So a lot of countries who are looking to become republics argue that the British judiciary system shouldn't be where they go for their appeals.
And the Commonwealth can mean different things, can't it? Because there's the Commonwealth realm and the Commonwealth of nations. I have no idea what the difference is. What is it? What does that mean?
So the Commonwealth realms, those are the 14 countries, aside from the UK that I mentioned before. Many of them are in the Caribbean, and they still have the British monarch as their head of state. They are also members of the Commonwealth of Nations, which is an association of 56 countries, and they come together for like financial benefits, trading benefits. We'll also know them from, the Commonwealth Games, participating in that. The Commonwealth of Nations also includes countries which weren't former colonies of the British, but those that were and still are part of the association have removed the British monarch as their head of state.
You've been looking into the 7 Caribbean islands which remain part of the Commonwealth realm, so they still have the monarch as the head of state. What's the feeling there about having Charles as the king?
So it does vary across the region and across those 7 Caribbean islands. In Jamaica, we know that there is seemingly a lot of enthusiasm to move towards a republic there. The Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, has indicated that he plans to hold a referendum on the issue by 2025, which is required there for that move to take place. And even during Prince William and Kate's visit to Jamaica last year, he brought up the topic in front of them and indicated that it was part of Jamaica's goals to move towards their, true independence and true destiny. In other countries, Grenada as well is one of the leading countries where republicanism is widely talked about. We know that they are holding later this month, next month, events to kind of bring this conversation back into the public to get people to support the issue, because again, they need to hold a referendum and it needs to go in favour of the proposal to move to a republic with a 2/3 majority before that can take place. So they need that time to kind of get people on board. There are also other countries where referendums have taken place in the past and haven't gone in the way of voting for a republic. So again, even though there are talks about moving towards that, a lot of these countries need time to just get people on board with the idea. It's not necessarily that there isn't enthusiasm for it, but for a lot of Caribbean people, they don't really have a connection with the British monarchy, so it's not something that they're kind of really thinking about in their day-to-day lives as
It's
a
not
priority.
very present.
No, so the politicians and campaigners for republicanism have to increase awareness that this is still something that's an issue, and then obviously get people to be against it.
And presumably that colonial legacy around the Commonwealth is a big part of why people are wanting to break away from it.
Yeah, definitely. So I spoke to Tyrone Roach from the UK edition of Barbados' Nation newspaper and chair of the National Council of Barbadian Associations in the UK. He said it's mainly the colonial links that are pushing people in the Caribbean to want to distance themselves from the Commonwealth realm. It's only natural as a black person to want someone of your own to be at the top focus of your country, rather than a white person who is located far away and doesn't have, a day-to-day connection to the country. I think that is a sentiment that's widely shared across people who are supporting this transition to republic. And it's also something that we, again, have seen reignited by the Black Lives Matter movement, just this issue of representation and identity, which is something that Caribbean countries who are, reevaluating their history, their colonial history, and what it means to distance themselves from that today and realise true independence are looking at.
Alannah, is there like an opposition group to these kind of pro-Republican movements? Is there a generational divide among the populations?
So there's definitely been a noted generational divide, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's kind of taken until now for this issue to gain this new energy. So there is a project, the Visible Crown Project, which has looked at attitudes and the connection between Queen Elizabeth II and the Caribbean. And a lot of the time among the older demographic in the Caribbean, that relationship has been quite favourable. The Queen was very highly respected, but they don't have that same connection with King Charles. Also, the younger people who, are growing up in these countries don't have that affinity with the monarchy either. One of the driving forces behind this move to change to republics has been the Black Lives Matter movement, which we know has captivated and mobilised a lot of younger Black people across the world, but also in the Caribbean. So that's definitely played into it. There have also been a reluctance from politicians to hold referendums where necessary because they have been unsuccessful in the past, and it can be kind of seen as a sign of the end of a politician's career.
Alannah spoke to Arley Gill, who's a magistrate and the chair of the Grenada National Reparations Committee, about the local feeling towards the coronation.
There is very little or no interest in the coronation of King Charles, frankly. There is no plans for celebration, there is no plans for protest. It is just simply the business of the British. I think for us, we've always known Queen Elizabeth. So this issue of King Charles, Grenadians may have followed King Charles and the drama with Diana, his former wife. But apart from that, there is really and sincerely no interest. It's not a conversation on the radio, on television. You simply do not hear persons speaking or looking forward to the coronation one way or the other. I would say that provides us with some sort of indication that really and truly the relevance of the monarchy to us here in Grenada is fading.
We know that Charles and William have expressed sorrow over the royal family's participation in slavery. Can you talk to us about how that was received locally?
We want this sorrow to be converted into a public apology. It is good enough to say that you feel sorrowful, that you regret, and so on, but we believe an apology whereby you acknowledge that the transatlantic slave trade and indeed slavery were crimes against humanity, and that you are going to make some sort of repair by contributing to reparations for the harm that was caused by the role that the British monarchy played in terms of the Atlantic slave trade, indigenous genocide, and slavery. That is what we really want to hear. So expressions of sorrow without more, though it is welcome, it is certainly not sufficient. We would want King Charles to do more. He has agreed to open the archives at the University of Manchester and to cooperate with the research that they are doing with regards to the role that the monarchy would have played in the Atlantic slave trade. We welcome that. We would want these researchers to even look at the role that they played in slavery. We would appreciate if these researchers will go further to look at the role that the monarchy played here in the Caribbean during slavery itself. But of course, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we were not having that conversation. So where we are now in 2023, these represent progress. So with regards to the sorrow that they have expressed, is a step in the right direction. But obviously, we believe much more should be done.
In your role as chair of Grenada's National Reparations Committee, you've obviously got your ears to the ground on how people in Grenada feel about remaining in the Commonwealth. Why do people in Grenada want to leave?
We want to leave because the British monarchy represents one of the last few relics of colonialism. The monarchy represents new colonialism. It represents some sort of political overseer over our decision-making on our independence. We want to leave because the monarchy is anti-democratic. It is despotic. The succession of leadership through the monarchy is based on bloodline. Nobody has voted for King Charles. It's a bloodline that have absolutely nothing with us here in the Caribbean. Obviously, as well, there's absolutely no benefit that has been derived from the British monarchy being head of state here in Grenada. Absolutely none. But more than that, it leaves a bad taste in our mouths that while we ask for reparations from the Great Britain, it so happens that the monarchy of Great Britain continues to be our head of state. We will not have true independence as long as the monarchy continues to be the head of state here in Grenada and other Caribbean islands.
Obviously, part of your role is to drum up enthusiasm for this cause of transitioning to a republic and removing King Charles as head of state. But is there any opposition within Grenada to leaving the Commonwealth realm?
There hasn't been any vocal opposition. I can tell you what's happening with Grenada and the rest of the Caribbean. The problem we have here is our own internal politics. Our constitution provides for us to for us to get rid of the monarchy as head of state, we have to do a referendum and have 2/3 of the persons voting, supporting that. Barbados did not have to have that referendum. They could have simply done a vote in parliament. But it's an entrenched provision in our constitution. The problem is our political leaders, from time to time, because of the adversarial and the tribal nature of it, can't seem to agree publicly on these issues. So that when this issue of republicanism comes up, everyone is looking for own political interest. They're looking for votes. We have had, for instance, 2 referenda in Grenada with regards to removing the Privy Council as our final appellate court and to accede to the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final appellate court. We've had 2 referenda, and on both occasions, the referendum failed because we did not have the 2/3 majority. And that is because we were not having the 2 major political parties campaigning and advocating and lobbying among their own supporters to support the call to join the Caribbean Court of Justice. And that has been the greatest difficulty in getting rid of the Privy Council and getting rid of the monarchy as our head of state. We believe, though, that with the coronation of King Charles, it may very well offer us a very good opportunity to convince our political leaders, because really and truly, I would say the major stumbling block is our political leadership, not the mass of the population, not the everyday man who walks on the street. It's our political leadership, both political parties, to sing the same hymn and to adopt the same position. We believe once that is done, we should be able to remove the monarchy as our head of state.
Arley Gill, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Digging into Britain's past to help our readers understand how it shapes today is what we do at I. To keep up with our news and features, consider a subscription. Go to inews.co.uk/podcast and get more than 30% off a digital subscription to I. I for open minds. Subscribe today. In 2021, Barbados became the first country in almost 30 years to replace the British monarch with a president. Serina Sandhu, our senior reporter, witnessed the ceremony. Serina, what was the atmosphere there like?
So, I've got to say, when I landed in Barbados a few days before the ceremony, it was quite lackluster. I don't know what I expected, but I guess I thought there'd be a buzz around the capital, Bridgetown. There were kind of structures being put up, there were flags, there were kind of rehearsals, musical performances, and that kind of thing. So I guess I thought there'd be jubilation around the city centre, but actually it was really lacking. Having said that, on the actual evening of the ceremony, they put on a brilliant show and it was meticulously planned. And I think there was just a lot of happiness, albeit maybe they thought this had been a long time coming. I think it was like this should have happened many, many years ago.
Right. In my head, the sort of statues being pulled down and things like that. Was there any of those kind of physical manifestations still there? And if so, were they left or were they taken down as well?
I think the first thing to say is there's no ill will towards Britain, towards the royal family. It's just what they saw as a natural step in their own future.
Alannah, do you think that other countries will be looking to Barbados as a sort of blueprint, as an example of maybe the direction of travel for them?
I think there's definitely been an influence from Barbados. So they've definitely impacted how other countries in the Caribbean have reignited these conversations around transitioning to a republic. But in terms of a blueprint, it is quite different in terms of how they would reach that stage, because Barbados and Belize, which is now a remaining Commonwealth realm, are the only two that were left in that group who could make the decision to become a republic without holding a referendum. So even though Barbados has kickstarted this, energy, Arley Gill told me that, they've ignited a fire in the belly of people in the Caribbean, and he was really crediting the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, and the Barbadian people for pushing this forward. So it's not as straightforward for those other countries where King Charles remains head of state, apart from Belize, like I mentioned. To remove him, they would have to hold a referendum.
Okay, interesting. Serina, tell us a bit more about the process involved in actually removing a head of state. As Alannah said, it varies from country to country, right? It's not a sort of linear process, but what kind of tracks are people looking down at the moment?
Indeed, yes. Like I said before, this wasn't some kind of sudden decision. The movement for Barbados to become a republic began more than 2 decades ago, really. But obviously, it's not an easy thing to simply remove a head of state who, at the time, was the Queen. So what happened in Barbados is that in order for it to become a republic, the Parliament had to amend this act, which is the Barbados Independence Order, and that required a 2/3 majority. So much more than just a simple majority.
It's quite a long process as well, because Barbados went independent in 1966, and yet they didn't remove the head of state until 2021.
That's right, and actually that's something that some of the people that I interviewed while I was out there mentioned. So one guy, Mark Cumberbatch, in his 70s at the time, he said, I felt this should have happened a long time ago. I think when we got independence in 1966, it should have gone straight to republic. At that time, colonialism had already run its course, was his sentiment. So I guess in that sense, the excitement was muted because for a lot of people, they were just like, well, yeah, obviously this should have happened decades earlier. A person who knows a lot more about this transition than me, though, is Dawn Lisa Callender Smith, and she is a local history guide in Barbados.
Hi, my name is Dawn Lisa Callender Smith. I'm a cultural practitioner and historic guide here in Barbados. For most Barbadians towards the royal family pre-2021, it was thought ambivalent. Most of us acknowledged that the Queen was head of state, but it was never here or there as part of our cultural landscape, especially for persons under 50. The royal family probably means more in Barbadian culture to persons over 65, simply because they would have been born pre-independence. So they really understand what it was to be part of Great Britain as a colony. But for Barbadians 50 and under, it's just part of the landscape. It's not relevant per se in our day-to-day lives.
Can you talk us through the process of how Barbados decided to replace the Queen as head of state with a Barbadian president?
It has been long debated in Barbados about replacing the Queen as head of our state. If you look at Barbadians historically, we would say we were independent since 1652, when Oliver Cromwell's party signed the Charter of Barbados, which allowed us to essentially operate as part of Great Britain, but be independent at the same time. We have always been a singularly independent people. So for us, the Queen being head of state was more of a figurehead than anything else. We were always self-governing. So the replacement of the Queen was just the final step in saying, yes, we are proud Barbadians. We are very good at managing ourselves. Why do we need a foreign head to validate us? We have already shown that we can stand tall on the world stage with the best, and we don't need a foreign head to say that. So for many Barbadians, it was just applause finally. For most Barbadians, it was time.
Are other countries looking to Barbados as an example of how to replace the British monarch as the head of state, do you think?
In terms of other countries looking to go the route of Barbados as becoming a republic, we know that for sure. We know Jamaicans are speaking openly about it now. And for most people, it is time. Gone are the days of our colonial shackles. We are speaking now about reparations and claiming our heritage and claiming ourselves. So it is very much a relevant conversation around the countries of the Commonwealth. We want to remain part of the Commonwealth for sure, but we don't need the king as head of state to do that.
And obviously we have the coronation coming up this weekend. What's the feeling on the ground in Barbados, would you say? Is there any excitement about the coronation of King Charles now that the country is a republic?
I don't ever think most Barbadians recognize it so soon that it's May 6th and it's around the corner. I think people probably are more interested in the gossip between the relationship of Prince Harry and Meghan and William and Kate. Charles becoming king. Most people probably say, well, it's about time, but how long would it last? I think probably for him, it's more, what will his relationship be within this modern world who's far more open and vocal about reparations, about accepting we now live in a world where people are free to be different. So for us Barbadians, however, it's just another day, simply because we have moved on with our lives.
Serina, do we get a sense of what the royals make of this themselves?
So I think the first thing to say is that Prince Charles, now King Charles, attended the ceremony in which Barbados officially became a republic. In his speech, he acknowledged that it was the will of the country. So there was no sense of disappointment. I think there was a sense of, if this is what you want, this is right for you. And I think the thing to remember is that while Barbados removed the Queen's head of state and is a republic, it's still very much in the Commonwealth, and there's no sign of that changing anytime soon.
And more recently as well, we've seen Charles starting to look again at the royals' links with slavery and some of the darker bits of its history.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's something that still kind of looms large, in Barbados, and I'm sure many Caribbean countries. I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about that. The calls for reparations are likely going to grow. One thing I should mention is there's this phrase that Barbados is Little England, because the ties are apparently so strong. From speaking to people, I think that's certainly a phrase that's had its time. it certainly didn't seem that the links were as strong as they maybe once were. Again, no ill will felt on either side, but I don't think that Barbados will be afraid of asking for what it wants.
Mm-hmm. There was the infamous royal tour, Alannah, wasn't there, recently with Will and Kate in the Caribbean. What was the mood that you picked up from people you spoke to about that trip and about sort of royal tours over there in recent years?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the trips were a bit of a disaster. We saw protests in the different countries where the royals visited. The Earl and Countess of Wessex cancelled their trip to Grenada at the last minute. It's understood that that was based on the feeling in the country. Campaigners were calling for talks on reparations, which isn't something that we have seen the royals discuss or engage with, even though they have acknowledged but not apologised for slavery and obviously the British monarchy's links with that.
From the darkest days of our past and the appalling atrocity of slavery, which forever stains our history, the people of this island forged their path with extraordinary fortitude.
There might be a different reaction with King Charles visiting the Caribbean, which is something that some historians I've spoken to have suggested might take place, just to maybe rebuild those relationships and to make an effort to not have the Commonwealth realms shrink anymore.
And do you think that would be welcome? Do you think it might end the same way as Will and Kate? I think if I was in their PR team, I wouldn't be optimistic, I think.
There is a possibility that he could approach it in a different way. So the tour by William and Kate was seen as quite outdated in terms of the way that it was carried out, whereas knowing that these conversations are being had, and if King Charles is really engaging with this evaluation of the British monarchy's history with colonialism and slavery, then it could be received differently. As Serina mentioned, there isn't ill will in the sense that people are sort of saying don't come here at all, but it's sort of, if you come here, then at least engage in these discussions and listen to what the people are saying.
So, Serina, just finally, is there a sense that with the death of the Queen and that transition of power, which is going to culminate in this weekend's coronation, that maybe it's also the culmination of the Commonwealth, that maybe this is a real tipping point for other nations to replace Charles as the head of state?
Look, I think this is something that is relevant for wherever you live, whether it be the UK or the Caribbean. With the passing of the Queen and the incoming of King Charles, people just aren't as connected with King Charles. A lot of us grew up with the Queen for absolute decades, and she was a marker of that time. And now with King Charles, it's kind of people are questioning their links to the royal family. So whatever conversations we're having here, they're certainly having them in Barbados and I'm sure beyond. I think we should expect more questions to be asked and for them to be even louder than they ever were before.
Another interesting thing is that Prince William ended his most recent disaster of a Caribbean tour by suggesting that he wouldn't assume to be the next head of the Commonwealth of Nations. This opens up the issue about countries who have become republics. How do they reconcile still being part of this association where the British monarch is head of state? And that's something that we might see change over the next few decades or so.
And what was William's basis for saying that? What made him think that he can't assume the title of Commonwealth King?
Well, it's not actually a hereditary position, but the member countries agreed to have King Charles take on the role after Queen Elizabeth based on her wishes.
And I think that speaks clearly towards countries' attitudes towards the royal family. It was the Queen's wishes, and maybe out of deference, respect, they were carried out. Maybe it was the right thing at the time. But under Charles, where feelings about him are less certain, we've got to ask whether there'll be that same level of deference to him.
Yeah. And it shows he's definitely cognizant then, isn't he, William, of the changing tide in all this. He knows, he's very aware of the situation there.
Yeah, I think the timing of those remarks that he made coming at the end of that tour showed that he had acknowledged how the sentiment had changed towards the British royal family. I guess it's his way of sort of acknowledging that those countries want to choose a figurehead who they feel better represents them.
That's all for this week. You can follow Alannah and Serina's reporting, as well as breaking news, in-depth features and insightful political analysis at inews.co.uk. As ever, we would love to hear your feedback, so drop us a line at podcasts@inews.co.uk. I'm Molly Blackall. You can find me on Twitter at Molly Blackall and on Instagram at molly.blackall. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.